Hello and welcome to Mothership Gear. Today we are at Dan Bailey's studio with some drums because we're talking about ribbon microphones as overheads, getting that like 70s drum sound. So Dan, how are you doing today?
Good, man. Yourself?
Doing well. I'm excited to finally talk the Coles 4038 with you because this is my favorite drum microphone.
The drum mic, yeah, absolutely.
Right. So, what's your connection to the microphone?
I mean, it's one of those kind of ubiquitous microphones in a studio environment. So like when you're growing up and you playing your little band's first recording or whatever, inevitably the studio, that's the nice mic they have is a Coles 4038 or a pair, They're just like an industry standard kind of ubiquitous recording microphone and have been kind of since its inception.
Right. Yeah, we were looking it up. It's like the BBC kind of alternative to the larger ribbon microphone. So it's smaller, but it's still a pretty beefy looking mic.
It's still a big microphone compared to, other overhead options today. But yeah, I mean, that's like all studio tools. They started out as, just they had a need at the broadcast level and they needed to invent a new microphone. And then it like happenstance, it also sounds awesome,
Right. You were telling me you've recorded with the BBC and they had like tons of these microphones.
We did my band did a live in studio thing a couple years ago at Might Avail, the BBC studio, and yeah, their mic locker was like was about 100 Beyer M201s and about 3 dozen Coles. Yeah, that's pretty. And with the exception, I think main vocal, I think they were on basically everything, and it sounded incredible.
Yeah, like they're like, how would you describe them tonally? Like, what's kind of the best way you could describe?
I've heard engineers talk about them as there's a lot of similarities to the human ear, where like the range they happen to pick up, or ribbon mics in general, have a lot to do with like how we hear things, how we experience sounds, and all that. So they're just very like kind of true and natural to what's going on in the space. They tend to be a little dark for drums, and most people add some top end EQ. But otherwise, they're just giving you kind of a full kind of balanced natural from, 40 hertz to 15K type of thing, a kind of a full range approach.
Right. So let's talk about the Glenn Johns method. You utilize that with these Coles. So break that down for us, like in this studio, how you do that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a classic, BBC, the Glenn Johns specifically, way to record drums. Back when you were only using 2 and 3 and 4 microphones on drums in the early 70s. So you wouldn't have necessarily like spot mics, on toms or something. And so if you're putting these type of, ribbon microphones that pick up a lot of like mids and lows, if you're trying to angle them to the way, to best pick up those parts of the kits, the tom and the kick drum and stuff, you end up with, instead of a standard stereo pair, which is just kind of what you think of when you think overheads, you end up with this like center of the kit, which is got to be held over from back when mono recordings were the thing. It's just that's where you put the overhead. So when it was time to like spread them out a little bit, it makes sense to put another one back here because you get all the tom information and like batter head of the kick. And because the Coles, all ribbon mics, any figure 8 mic has kind of like a notch built into it. So that weirdly the side address of the mic rejects really well. So having one here, weirdly it's like rejecting all the cymbals. And you're actually like focusing on the snare and the toms and the kick drum. But yeah, it's a very like easy to engineer with microphone because kind of whatever you pointed at sounds like how it sounds, it's great for that.
So then let's talk about the 70s specifically. Like how would you go about getting that like John Lennon solo record?
Yeah, like the early
George
70s.
Harrison thing,
yeah.
the Ringo Starr thing, maybe late 60s, early 70s vibe. With these microphones.
Well, I mean, so much of it is the playing and kind of inhabiting that, the vocabulary of the time and how they were playing and stuff. But yeah, I've got some Rogers drums. They famously, both Ringo and Bonham used Ludwig drums, but very similar, like thin shell with a reinforcement ring, thin hoop. It's very similar kind of formatted drum. And so to get the 70s thing, 60s is very tonal and wide open. These drums have internal mufflers on them, so I've got them kind of touched, the difference between this and this.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So it's taking away a lot of the like Motown-y kind of bong away from the drums. They got into T-towels, internal mufflers, things like that. And so you get this kind of drier attack, shorter decay, more thump. And these microphones, because they harness, like 100 hertz so well that like low end kind of tom thump is the thing they're known for. But yeah, to get that sound, I would just be about, if you had a kind of a wide open drum kit, you would find some way to muffle. Everyone has their preferred method, but you would get, some in the bass drum to get a little deader. You'd get the toms so that they don't have this big, long kind of overtone. Same with the snare. And then, just trying to think about playing with balance and trying to focus on the fact that if you were really in the 70s, you would only have 3 or 4 mics. So it's not going to be about leaning on the close mics to get you the inner kit balance. It's about like playing like that. So like for me, it's just about, just to play for a second. So much of that era is like when you see the footage of, John Lennon, Imagine, or Plastic Ono Band, any of the documentaries of Ringo in that 69, 70, 71, 72 era, like he's not playing hard. He was playing hard in the live performances in the US and stuff. But by that point, so much of that tone is about not waking the drums up too much and letting them stay kind of dead. And your like actual attack has a lot to say with how the drums respond. And that's why I like the Cole so much, is that it's such a natural kind of picture of the kid. It's like anything I do playing wise really shows up in the mics.
Right.
Like off camera, we were talking about like a John Bonham approach, because that's the other famous, like those are the 2 most famous drummers recorded with these mics is Ringo and Bonham. And like just to show as an example, we should probably just like open up my room mics for a second and post when we listen to this, and I'll play, more rim shots, more like biting. I'll play harder. Mm-hmm. And that'll get you to kind of Bonham land, even though nothing else is going to change, It'll have a lot of that same fundamental texture, just I'm giving it a lot more energy. And as soon as you bring in room mics or a bigger space into the thing, that's where the Bonham, like all those reflections come from,
Right, yeah, it's how you engage the snare too, because it's like it sounds like a totally different snare drum.
Yeah, just that's the difference between rim shots and middle of the head and playing harder, and just trying to like, so much of being a musician, especially in a studio context, is like learning to be like a character actor. Where it's like, I need you to do, it's the same way as if you got hired to do a movie and it had like a 1970s Philadelphia accent. You would have to learn how to do that. And so for like playing, it's like learning to engage like, oh, I'm now in 1971 doing this type of thing. And to make those changes and then let the engineering just kind of document,
Right. And it's also, I think the more that drummers are in the studio interacting with the mics, they're kind of understanding how they want to approach that mic before they even sit down. It's like you have an intimate relationship with all the microphones in your studio because you're recording them all the time. So you're also anticipating the way that the microphone's going to capture it. So there's, like you said, there's the player psychology of the era, maybe there's a reference that you're receiving, Ringo or Bonham. But then there's also knowing how the microphone's going to capture it. And then also there's the analog gear that you're running the microphones into. So what are you running these microphones into?
So these Coles are going into a stereo Ampex 600 series. And that's the front end from the old Ampex tape machine. And so that's like a very common 50s and 60s mic pre. And I figure since we were talking about kind of that era, historical recording, why not plug it in, those mics into the pre that they would have been in back in the day. But something about tube, you always wonder if it's a chicken or the egg type of thing. Like, do we think tube mics or tube mic preamps and ribbon mics sound great because they do, or is that what we heard growing up and so we've learned to like tune our ears to it? But there's something about a tube preamp on a ribbon mic that it just like it engages a little bit of distortion in a really nice way. It's not super brittle sounding, still has size, but it something about the thickness of what a ribbon mic gives you hits a tube pre like really pleasantly, and there's a reason it's like a go-to combo, for every recording.
Right. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing about these mics. So the kit that we have before we go, this is a Rogers. Tell us a little bit about the kit that you use.
This is a couple years old. I've had it for a little bit. This is a kit I've used on the road a little bit, about to send them back out on the road, actually. This is a Rogers Covington. I think it's like a 2021 or 22. It's pretty recent. 13, 16, 22 with like as vintage spec as I could get it, like the internal mufflers and stuff like that. But they're just a really like solid recreation of what because I've got several of the vintage kits too. But these live in a really nice zone where they sound like those, but also like they're going to go live in a truck trailer for 6 months, and I don't have to wait if they get stolen or broken, or I mean, it would suck, but I'm not like out like a nostalgic piece of gear, you know. But
Right.
for what they are, they're total workhorse, and I really dig them. They've you know, served me really well in the time I've had them, for sure.
And then heads, what do you have on that?
Oh, just coated ambassadors on everything. Coated ambassador, top and bottom of toms and the kick. You know, ambassador snare side on the bottom of the snare. But I mean, that was the only head option for the first 50 years. You know, it's like that's what these drums were designed to run. So when you get an old kit or like a new old stock kind of factory reimagining of a vintage kit, the second you put coated ambassadors on them, it's like, oh, that's the sound, you know. That's what everybody was chasing for years.
Cymbals, what do you have for cymbals?
These are a bunch of Istanbul Agop. I've been playing them forever, and a bunch of just traditional crash ride and a 20-inch jazz ride and a 20-inch 30th and a guy over here with rivets that I don't think I hit, but but yeah, just a bunch of Agop traditionals like always, you know.
Sick. And then where can people follow you if they want to learn more about the sessions you're playing on? And
yeah, I mean,
you have a
Instagram at D Richard Bailey for sure. And then if you click through that, I've got a Patreon thing where I go more into depth of my like day-to-day of recording and stuff. But yeah, that's probably the best place to find me, you know.
Sick. And then recording wise, there is going to be, it's been announced, right? So there's going to be some new music that they're going to be able to hear your drums on.
Mm-hmm.
That should be really cool.
That's very flavored by the types of things we've been talking about. A lot of like early 70s on this next band record that's I believe by this point has been announced, so it's fine.
Cool. All right.
Man.
Well, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you guys next time. Don't forget to subscribe, and yeah, we'll see you guys later.